I'd like to welcome you all to our Friday afternoon plenary. It's called How Bars Can Collaborate with Businesses to Promote Democracy. And we all know that what's important to bar organizations promoting the rule of law and democracy are also important to our country. But what can we do in this election year to be sure that we as bar leaders are doing our part? Today's moderator, ABA's immediate past president, Deborah Enix Ross, will lead a discussion with our panelists on civic participation activities that have been supported by for-profit corporations and discuss how state and local bars can collaborate with businesses on civic engagement activities. We want to hear from you during this program, too. So what has your bar been doing to promote democracy and reach out to your business community? What information would you like to receive to help you continue to promote the rule of law and democracy? This program is all designed to get you, bar leaders, in action on democracy. This session is a joint effort between the NCBP, the ABA Advisory Commission to the Task Force for American Democracy, and the ABA Cornerstones of Democracy, Civics, Civility, and Collaboration Commission. Thank you, Deborah. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. So I am breaking protocol a little bit because I feel like I have more energy when I'm standing. So if my panelists don't mind, I'm going to do that. As it's been indicated, I am Deborah Enix Ross, the immediate past president of the ABA, and some of you may have heard me say this before, but it bears repeating again. The best title for me, other than mom, is immediate past president, right? But I do want to thank all of you for coming. We've heard who our co-sponsors are. We've got a really great panel. And I want to start by saying when I was becoming ABA president, I started thinking about how would you use this incredible platform? What would be the best way, what messages? And what I realized is that my non-lawyer friends were asking me all types of legal questions. Now, we know as lawyers, people who are not lawyers think lawyers know everything about every area of the law. So I would tell them, no, I don't know landlord-tenant, and no, I don't know shipping law. But what I do know is that they were asking me questions that really went to democracy and rule of law. They weren't using those phrases, but that's what they were talking about, civics and civility and the rule of law. So we are here to talk about what we can do as leaders in bars and leaders in the business community, because that's the collaboration that we need. So let me quickly introduce this panel so that you can really hear from them. We have all the way on my far left is Dominique Calhoun. He's the president of the National Bar Association. Next to Dominique is Terry Meldrum. She's the senior vice president and general counsel of Ohio Health Corporation. And then I like to say my new bestie, Mark Howard, who is the executive vice president and chief legal officer of Nationwide. And we were proud in the ABA to give Nationwide the ABA Medal of Citation for their incredible work. So Mark, it feels good to be back with you. So when we were coming up with this program, and you may have seen the line, we were talking about what can business do. And as Forbes noted, a thriving democracy is good for business. So with that in mind, I'd like to ask each of our panelists this first question. How do you respond to that statement? Do you think a thriving democracy is good for business? We'll go down the line.
Oh, you're starting with me.
Yes.
All right. Well, first and foremost, I am chasing that title of immediate past president as well. So I'm glad that our president-elect is here. But absolutely, I think that first and foremost, when we talk about the strategies of what businesses could do and whether or not you get a thriving democracy, if everyone has stake and if everyone sees the benefit of their works and the engagement that's happening around the country, then absolutely you get the tie-in and buy-in for democracy. When people believe that their elected officials, regardless of what station it is, federal, state, local, municipal, when they believe that those people are representing their interest, you have buy-in from the general public to say, I will engage in the political process. However, often, especially today, what we see is that people don't have that belief. They don't believe that their elected officials will do anything. And equally, they don't believe that when they go to those elected officials, state their claims, that they're heard. Often, for business to live and thrive, there's intersectionality regarding what business does and what our government officials do, which is the reason why, and you can look at this in any direction, major corporations have government relations offices, because as their businesses thrive and succeed, so does government. So I think the general answer is yes, but I think today in this discussion is, what does that look like for the future of America?
Yeah, I think absolutely, and I think my answer is similar. I think a thriving democracy is absolutely key to a thriving business, and I look at it from two perspectives. First, one of the main, I would say, theoretical points of a thriving democracy is to create stability, and business thrives in stability. I think most large organizations, and even small organizations, to be honest, run into trouble when there's instability in the market, and we see that today. Instability in our electoral process, instability in our regulatory process, so regulatory agencies who flip-flop relative to policies and procedures. All of that creates instability, which makes it more difficult, not impossible, but more difficult to be successful from a business perspective. I also look at it from inside an organization. Instability in democracy, to me, creates instability for your associates and employees. And when you have associates and employees who are coming to work worried about the things that an unstable democracy creates, am I safe? Do I have fundamental needs? Does my government support me? When you have associates coming to work fundamentally worrying about those things, they're less productive, they're less willing to show up and be who they are, and that creates stability for any company. So I look at democracy as a fundamental platform for how business can be productive in the community with our work and with our employees.
Yeah, and I'll pick up a little bit on Terry's point, because that was going to be one of my answers as well. When you think about the wellness of the employees that work in a lot of these companies, you think of a variety of things: pay, benefits, other aspects of it. But I will tell you that certainly in the pandemic, and it has been true since then, to the extent we have things like listening sessions and you hear things that are on their mind, things in the political process really do come front and center. And the mere opportunity to share and to exchange has been enormously productive. And I can actually, when we say, is it good for business, I'll give you a very tangible example. Just this morning, so it was very timely for this event, we had an industry rag sheet that had done a survey of employees at the top 20 insurance companies, and it was for wellness and stability. And they were troubled by it because 17 out of the 20 insurers had dropped in a material way during that time period, and only 3 of them did not. And I'm obviously delighted Nationwide was one of those that stood its ground. And if you asked me to attribute that, things like layoffs in the industry are obviously relevant right now. Various other factors, coming back to work, that plays into it. But I would suggest to you that the relationship and the trust you have with your employees on topics such as these, the ones we're talking about today, I actually believe play a significant role. So I agree with Terry's point on that. Coming back a little bit to one of Dominique's point, our government relations folks tend to say that when we have the most productive efforts out of our area, they tend to come when our branches of government are frankly divided in a positive way. In other words, you may have one party in one executive branch, and you may have another one in the legislative and another one in the judicial, and you have them in a split way. And why is that? Well, oftentimes it's because the legislation coming out of those periods are the result of compromise. They require compromise, and the quality tends to go up. Tangible example in our world is we're in the retirement business, and we've been very active in lobbying for retirement legislation. Well, that's been one area where the parties actually have been somewhat productive, and we win when we come out with new laws and regulations that enable the products and services that allow America to retire in a better place. And we have other examples of that, but those tend to come when there's elements of compromise. And when you don't have that, when one party tends to have the whole thing, things sometimes don't get as good of results. And so I do think that absolutely democracy and the way that our employees can exhibit that democracy is absolutely good for business.
So I'm glad you all said that, because the whole idea behind this is the premise that democracy might be good for business. How do we then, how do you make that happen within your organizations? Like, what do you do? What kinds of activities or do you encourage, or how do you encourage your employees to be involved in civic engagement? And I know, Mark, you've got some specific examples.
Sure, I'd be happy to share. So at Nationwide, we have a civic action program, and I think if we can start the slides there, we've got that. If we can go to the next one. Perfect. Our civic action program was one of the first started in corporate America, and it was the first in the insurance industry. And you see there on the bullets some of the things that it does. It provides education on elections, candidates, and issues. We facilitate poll worker training, voter registration opportunities, and then we have forums with various thought leaders and political candidates. Those are all aspects of our program, and I will tell you another piece of it that's not on this page, but I consider it critical to its success. It is truly nonpartisan. So our company could take positions, we can advocate in various ways, but when we talk about our Civic Action Program, the goal really is to get our associates involved in the process. And going back to some of those earlier discussions that we had during the pandemic, it was enormously helpful, and one of the answers to some of the questions when we'd have associates that would want us to take a position this side of the coin or that side of the coin, and oftentimes our answer was the company will not take a position in that, but we would very much encourage every associate to go to the polls, get active in different ways. This is how you contribute to your society, and our associates have taken that very seriously. So one of the things we say there with the forums with thought leaders and political candidates, we were honored to be approached by the ABA to consider a partnership and with the Cornerstones of Democracy Commission, and so we were delighted to accept that. And last year we had a civic engagement forum in Columbus, Ohio, that it doesn't necessarily mean it's the be-all, end-all, but it's a good example that if bar leaders want to see how collaborations can happen, we thought we'd try to show some examples of that. Next slide, please. There you have it. That was what showed on the screen. It was very much a partnership, and we were very proud to have Deborah and others from the ABA. Bill Weissenberg's here in the audience, Michael Flowers. They were very instrumental in putting this together. Next slide. So I want to talk through what's on this slide, because as bar leaders, there were aspects to this that I think are good takeaways for the kinds of forums that you may wish to consider in your state as you work with businesses. I'm going to start clockwise at the top. You see Deborah and I there on stage, and we had an opportunity to share our views on this, where the ABA was on this, and the opportunities that we saw ahead. So we had none other than the ABA president, and you were the current president at that time. It was before you got your distinguished title. And so we had that. On the bottom right there, what you see is parts of a packed house at Jeffers Auditorium in Columbus. This was again during the pandemic, and we had not had a lot of activities on campus, and this one was like a complete sellout. The entire auditorium was packed, and we had to have 2 overflow areas for folks to watch. The community actually came out in droves. A lot of the law firm partners that we have brought many of their folks physically on campus, and it was just really a great event in that regard. You see on the bottom left, we had a civics fair that was outside of the auditorium, and so we had very heavy involvement from the boards of election from the counties that were in and surrounding the central Ohio area, and so you see some smidgens of that, which, by the way, at the forum, we had the Secretary of State as well as the heads of several of the election officers from around the area. So that was extremely informative and helpful. And then the one, if I'm going to really zero in on one, it's the one on the top left. Let me tell you who's on that panel. The one on the left is Steve English. He's our head of external affairs, our government relations space. With him on the panel, on the far right, is Pat Teaberry. He was a former Republican congressman from Central Ohio. Next to him is Michael Coleman, who was the former mayor of Columbus, and I think it'd be fair to say tends to lean Democratic, and I point that out in contrast to Pat, who's to his left. And right next to former Mayor Coleman is Mary Augsburger. I don't know if Mary's in the crowd today, but Mary is the CEO of the Ohio State Bar Association, and so she was very active on that panel talking about how the bars can contribute to the conversation. And I will tell you, I don't know if you agree, Deborah, but that panel was a home run. It was very spirited. It gave great insights, a lot of laughter. They swapped some war stories, and you came out of there, frankly, I think, feeling really good. So hopefully this gives you a little sense of at least how we decided to do a forum, and I think as bar leaders, there's a lot of the corporate community that would be welcome to these kinds of events.
Terry?
Yeah, so that's best in class. And I'm in awe of Mark's leadership in putting that together and bringing it to the community, and that really is best in class. I think what is most impressive about what Mark and Nationwide did is interjecting the bar and the legal community as leaders in the civic discussion. Our community, our profession really should be the go-to, and I say that to you as members of bars. We should be the go-to to helping the greater community understand civics and understand its importance in our dialogue. At Ohio Health, we are a not-for-profit organization, a large, complex not-for-profit organization, but yet still led by the IRS regulations around charitable organizations. As a result of that, we have some limitation on what we can do as it relates to getting involved in politic and election cycles. But we do have, like Mark, a very robust public relations department. We also have a very robust, what we don't call it civic engagement, but what I'll call electoral or get out the vote education for our employees. We do that in a little more grassroots manner. We have a get out the vote campaign at each of our care sites. We have 15 hospitals across most of Ohio. We have get out the vote campaigns for our associates during the election cycles. We provide materials on our website for our associates, but it's more internal. And I share that to say as members of the bar associations, Mark has a national company with a big footprint. There are smaller organizations that need resource, that need education, that need a go-to to be able to help their associates and employees understand the role of civics. And so I encourage bars to get involved to provide those resources for organizations that need it.
And that's an excellent point, Terry, and I'm wondering, Dominique, the NBA, of course, is a national bar association, but you have chapters across the country. Mm-hmm. And I know that some of your work has been focused on democracy issues and especially voting rights. And I wonder if this is an opportunity for NBA chapters, affiliates, to look at in their communities, and especially the not-for-profit companies that may not have the nationwide resources that Nationwide has, okay.
We'll give it to you.
But to be able to partner in that way, that might make sense.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I absolutely think so. I mean, I'm blessed. I'm in an organization that is fairly large and we have the resource to rally and educate our associates. And we can do it in the context of nonpartisan education across the organization. But I can certainly think of a myriad of not-for-profit organizations that feel very restricted in their ability to do that. And that's where I think bar associations and the legal profession sit in a unique position to be able to really be leaders in that space and to carry the flag of civility and civics across our country.
From a bar perspective, and you have to commend Nationwide for I think it's 45 plus years of work of civic engagement that you've all engaged in. But here I serve as the 81st president of the largest and oldest association of African American lawyers and judges in the country, founded in 1925, approaching a centennial year. And you have to remember 1925 if you understand the purpose, the mission, exactly what we do is to ensure the longevity of the Bar Association and its diversification, and ensure that African Americans, the African American lawyer, the roughly 5% of all lawyers, 67,000 of them, that includes our judges and law professionals, have a place in the bar and in the bench and in democracy. That has been exactly what we have done for the last century and what we'll continue to do. So when you talk about the works of protecting democracy, as one of our core tenets and foundations, we actually have a standing committee called our Election Protection Coordinating Committee. And it's not just during a presidential cycle, it's during the entire year. We have 84 chapters around the country, 2 internationally, and we are constantly working to ensure not only are we educating the general public about what civic engagement is, but also training the next generation of lawyers, the civil rights activists, those who will ensure that the erosion of democracy doesn't occur. And so we often partner with entities around the country, whether they're corporate or nonprofit, to ensure that there are attorneys there to assist with the election process. And then I'll give you this final point, and then I know we want to keep the program moving. This year has been unique for me, and I will interject with the other national presidents. That would include our very own Mary Smith, Daniel Mateo from the HNBA, Anna McCarter-Clark from NAPABA, to the South Asian, the Federation for the Blind Lawyers, and so on. We call ourselves the Elite Eight. And we have had 2 meetings at the White House just in the fall to discuss this very point. Now, obviously, there are differences in our organizations and how we operate. The ABA has 1 million committees, and you can't do anything without so much approval. Juan Thomas will tell you at the NBA it's a little different. But within that conversation, we have looked at how do we, as the lawyers, come together to ease the miscommunication that's going on in this country. You have to remember that before cable television, people would trust the news source that they get the information from. Today, we have different pockets of our republic that only look at certain areas of information, and they only trust that area of information. And so to have programs that are nonpartisan, that are across the country, and ultimately, if we all have this singular goal in mind, we'll take all of our associations to come together. Because even though the ABA is widely respected amongst the lawyers around the world, it's very difficult in some areas for you to deliver that message in an urban environment, and you'll need the MBA. It'll be very difficult for you to deliver that message at the south of the border, and you'll need H&BA. And so what we have looked at is how can we collectively come together to provide a source of information that is together, that we all put a stamp of approval on to say that we've all vetted this information, it's valid regardless of the jurisdiction, and it works.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Thinking about each of you and how you've been able to enact programs in whatever environment, I did want to let us know that we were meant to have another panelist from KeyBank who unfortunately was not able to be here, but was so dedicated as to send some slides. And I do want to highlight a couple of points that they say at KeyBank. So KeyBank actually offers voting time off for both primary and general elections. So that's one of the things that they do. They said in election years, they communicate early and often about guidelines and policies to ensure individual views and actions are just that they are the individual and not representative or affiliated with the company. And I think that's one of the points that you were making, being sure that you want to encourage your employees, but at the same time, you have to protect the companies. And then he said, we offer an internal point of contact in both Key Legal, that's the law group, as well as government relations so that employees can seek guidance in advance of taking action. And then I wish you could see this. It's bold. It says, above all else, we stress the need for civility and respect towards colleagues and with clients. And I think that is clearly an area where we need to continue to underline and to underscore that you can have civic engagement. We need civic engagement, but we also need to do it in a way that promotes civility and that people understand why that is important. So let's see. I have these questions, but you know, I tend to go off script. We all know that. But Mark, did you want to talk a little bit about your electoral college video that you, because there was we all know that a lot of people don't understand the electoral college. So Nationwide came up with an interesting way to address that.
Sure. Well, thanks, Deborah. We, as part of this forum that you saw up there, we thought we would experiment a little bit with a couple of videos that I think of Schoolhouse Rocks, those of us that grew up and we saw them Saturday morning on ABCs, and you know, I'm just a Bill, I'm here on Capitol Hill, remember all those? So we took a stab at trying to think of a few topics that we thought folks probably might not ever even ask a question about, but you can't assume they know everything. So we took an adult version of Schoolhouse Rock and we did it on several topics. The one Deborah's referring to that we showed, we brought here. It's about 3 minutes long, so I apologize in advance, but it's designed to give a flavor for the Electoral College. And again, it's not meant to be in any way partisan. It's really trying to just state the facts on some basic questions about how that works. And again, I would emphasize that it was designed to simply educate, and I think it has received some favorable feedback. So, Nick, if you want to Run that Electoral College video, please. Thanks. Every 4 years, voters elect a group of electors whose only purpose is to elect the president and vice president. This group of electors is known as the Electoral College, but it can be a little complex to understand exactly how it works. I'm here with Natasha to walk us through the process.
When voters cast their ballot for President of the United States, they aren't necessarily voting for that person directly. Instead, they are casting a vote for presidential electors, collectively known as the Electoral College. The elector then votes for the same candidate on their behalf.
And in most states, members of the Electoral College hold the responsibility of voting in the same way that the majority of their state voted.
Let's talk about how the members of the Electoral College are chosen. The members of the Electoral College are elected by political parties and other groups in each state, typically at a party convention or by the party's state committee. In most states, they are elected to cast a vote for the presidential candidate that the majority of constituents in their state have voted for.
To ensure that every citizen of a specific state is represented, the Constitution assigns each state with a number of electors that are equal to the total number of members in the Senate and the House of Representatives.
For example, California has 2 senators and 53 House members, which totals 55 electoral votes. Because the number of House of Representatives varies in each state, the number of electoral votes for that state also changes. In total, there are 538 electoral votes, which is a number derived from 100 senators, 435 members of the House of Representatives, and 3 electors for the District of Columbia. In order to be elected president, the candidate must receive 270 of the electoral votes, or a majority.
Generally, states award all their Electoral College votes to whoever won the poll of ordinary voters in the state. For example, if a candidate wins 50.1% of the vote in Texas, they are awarded all of the state's 38 electoral votes. Alternatively, a candidate could win by a landslide and still pick up the same number of electoral votes. It's therefore possible for a candidate to become president by winning a number of tight races in certain states, despite having fewer votes across the whole country.
Fact: there are only 2 states, Maine and Nebraska, that divide up their Electoral College votes according to the proportion of votes each candidate receives. Due to the winner-take-all method most states use to determine their presidential electors, presidential candidates usually focus on campaigning in specific swing states rather than trying to win over as many voters as possible across the country. In these battleground states, the vote could swing either way.
We hope this has helped explain the Electoral College system. There was a reason the Founding Fathers created the Electoral College. While it might seem unnecessary or complicated, it ensures that every state has a meaningful voice in the electoral process.
Make sure you're registered to vote. To register or confirm your voter registration status, visit usa.gov/voter registration.
So how many of you knew that that's how the Electoral College, I confess, this is the second time I'm seeing it, I was like, oh yeah, that's how they do the math. So, but you see, that's the kind of thing where that's neutral, you can explain it to people. It's a resource that I think all of us can certainly benefit from. So we understand how and why companies would get involved in civic engagement. But one question is, are there any negative impacts? And when, again, James Waters from KeyBank said that there are some compliance and other considerations that one should take, and I'm just going to, again, read his thoughts. So he says, providing support and education for employees affirms our company's commitment to engage in the democratic process. That's very good. But in doing so, we aim to minimize reputational, headline, and operational risks. So one example is if someone makes an improper contribution that could disqualify the bank from competing for business in a certain jurisdiction. Or if an employee attends a political rally for a senator or someone while wearing a company-branded T-shirt. Employees using company email to distribute and invite to a political fundraiser. I guess that's where we as lawyers and bar leaders can help our in-house counsel by looking at the pitfalls with you about your engagement. So have you, Mark, when you thought about how you encourage your employees, do you think of some of these pitfalls, or are there others that you've tried to avoid?
We think about them in the sense of we certainly have the compliance mechanisms that James was referring to. And truthfully, again, if you build a good trust factor with your employee base, usually you can avoid most of those without a whole lot of fanfare. And so candidly, it's stuff to be mindful of, but it's not something that should cause you to avoid participation. And I think that's where I would leave it.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I would say this is one area where, as a lawyer, I'm going to say the regulations actually help us as a charitable organization, because we do have strict prohibitions around what we can and can't do, and those regulations really do keep us in the lane of partisan education and conversation. We do have the ability to educate and support issues that are tied to our charitable mission, so healthcare-related issues and policy. But I think if you stay in that lane, to Mark's point, if you stay in the lane of neutrality, nonpartisanship, and issues that are specific to your business and mission, I think you can manage most of those.
Look, I own my own law firm back in Houston, and as long as the good folks at Nationwide stay on my side, we'll keep in business. But no, I think it's just important that you don't allow. I kind of retorted when you said the reputation out in the public, right? And that's always the fear. It's a fear for bar associations to say we can't get involved. It's a fear for the state bar, local bar, whoever, to say, oh, we can't do that because someone is going to tie us into this political candidate or that one. And ultimately, I say the importance of it is that if this means something to us all, this protection of our republic, if it means something to all of us, then you can't have those fears. To Mark's point, you can do everything that you can do, and as long as your folks trust and believe not only in the system, but also in your corporation that you're doing the right thing. And if you are engaged in this work, you absolutely are. In doing the right thing will keep people engaged into the process. And so can't have fear that somebody is going to attack you because you're doing the right thing to protect democracy.
Back to James's point, Deborah, a little bit, I'll follow up a little bit. There are occasions where we'll have either an employee or even more so an officer of the company who has a position that may differ from the company's position. And number one, most of our folks know good and well they have to be careful about whether they're speaking for themselves or for the organization. So that's first and foremost. But we do have occasions where we'll get the question of, do you guys really support XYZ? Because former Officer Smith here was all about it, and we just have to take those one at a time. But I don't think it defrays us from encouraging both officers and other employees from being involved in the political process. It's just something you have to navigate.
Yeah, I mean, for the ABA, we have policy, and the ABA president can't speak on an issue unless there's policy. So there are those kinds of guardrails. But even within some of the work that we do in the ABA, you get pushback because people either say you've gone too far left, or you're going too far right, or you're not going far enough. But I take the point that that shouldn't dissuade us from these core elements of promoting civics and civility and the cornerstones of democracy, because it's all about the rule of law. Yeah. Terry?
And I would just I think we've said it in a couple of different ways, but I would just argue again, it's not about communicating, participating, or being political. It's about educating on the process that this country is established under. And it is established under a framework that allows for checks and balances and debate and dialogue that results in a reasoned system. So I think if companies stick in that lane, it's not about the politic of it. It's not about what policy you believe in or what candidate you're going to vote for. It's about the system and staying true to the system and making sure our community is educated on their role in that system.
Mark, I think at one point you talked about judges and certainly the stability, I would guess is how I would phrase it. And we know that some of the courts have now been seen as politicized as well. But I would imagine that for businesses, when you talk about how it's important you get a better outcome when there's collaboration with the legislative process, that's a message that I hope that we can continue to push. We even saw in the ABA's most recent Civic survey that people want the branches of government to collaborate. They want them to reach consensus. They want them to be able to compromise. So the work that you're doing and all of you are doing to show that it's possible to have that kind of collaboration and to have that kind of communication, I think is really, really important. I'm getting the 2-minute warning, which means that it's time to turn to those of you in the audience. If you've got any questions, there are going to be microphones. People are going to be walking around with them. So you can begin to think of your questions if you have for our panelists. While you're doing that, you're coming up to get the microphone. Okay, that's step one. Don't be shy. I don't think it's a shy group. But, you know, the idea behind putting this panel together is how you as bar leaders can work with the business community. So we've seen that businesses do have an interest in promoting democracy and the rule of law. How can you partner with them? This is really your opportunity to do that. Yes, gentleman in the back.
Well, hi, thanks.
And could you, sorry, I should have said this, can you state your name and affiliation?
Absolutely. Jason Connie, I'm the chair of the Standing Committee, the ABA Standing Committee on Election Law, and so I thought I would bring up a question of partnership. Mark, very interested to hear that part of your program was training for poll workers. The ABA sponsors Poll Worker Esquire to encourage lawyers to work at the polls. What kind of training did you do, and do you give incentive to your employees to be out on election day? One thing we say as lawyers is all the election lawyers are working that day, so we'd like to encourage other lawyers and others with civic interests to be there helping at the polls because they need it.
Yeah, I think the tone we set is we encourage folks to do that. We say if you want to get involved in the process, here's a variety of ways you can do it, and we're fairly overt about that. And poll workers are one of them. We encourage them to do that. We do facilitate it through our organization. And here's another thing. So coincidentally, yesterday, our Civic Action Program sent out a summary reminder to everybody, to all of our associates, and it was almost like a menu of primary season is here. Here's a lot of things to help you as you decide how to participate in the process. And what I loved about it, and I was looking at it in light of the fact we were going to have this conversation today, I love the fact we had a ton of hyperlinks in that message, and it took you straight to various things. One of them was poll worker training, and we host that. and we facilitate it, so we allow you to click the button, register, and we encourage you to do that. So as a result, we have a healthy number of folks that are at the polls on election day. And then we too facilitate folks go into the polls. It's standard practice and it's part of our formal policies that you are permitted to go vote without having to take any time off. So it's as simple as that.
And thank you for that question, and I would encourage everyone, if you haven't done it, to really become a poll worker. I did in my local elections, and it was really eye-opening for me. It's a long day, by the way. It's like, because our polls open at 6, so you have to be there before 6 to set up, and they close at 8, but you have to wait till the last person votes. And I actually served in my local neighborhood, so I could see my neighbors were coming over to me. I live in New Jersey. What was very interesting to me was the number of people that walked up and started showing me identification. And actually, New Jersey's law is that we are not supposed to ask people to, for their identification unless there's a problem. But that had resonated so much that they were thinking that there was the lack of integrity, that when they saw me, thankfully my neighbors saw me and felt relieved. They didn't go, oh my God, she's here, I know it's no integrity. It was the opposite. They were like, okay, she's here, I can trust this. But it really was an eye-opening experience.
And
Yes. A question here,
Terry.
and then we'll come to you, sir.
I think Terry has
Oh, and then Terry.
I was just going to add, because Mark raised the issue of hyperlinks. That's one of the things that we do within our organization. So we have a website that directs our associates to publicly available information about the election process, including information from our bar associations. So that's really important information that you all put out through your bars. And I would encourage you to build your connections with the GCs in your areas, because I think having the ability to do that helps an organization like mine.
I think businesses would be delighted to use bar association materials as things that they would probably link to their employees pretty fast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit more about the nitty-gritty of partnerships between bars and businesses. And it sounds like some businesses are big enough and have enough resources to, provide the education and tools for their own employees. And there was a discussion about the smaller businesses or maybe nonprofits. And what I want to do is get in the nitty-gritty of what exactly would you need from bars in order to, enhance the participation and education of business employees, but also create that kind of partnership or bridge to the business community from bars. And so I look around the room and I see an opportunity here to fill a gap that's there and really push and promote democracy. So do you have some suggestions on what specific things would small businesses or nonprofits be looking for bars? And then I'm curious to think about, what the bars would say, like, do we have these resources? Can we fill that gap? How can we get that done?
Yeah, I would just say outreach. I just think do an outreach program in which you are collecting or connecting with the organizations in your area, whether large, small, or in between. I think that sort of outreach would be incredibly helpful so that companies and in-house lawyers in particular who, are running day to day and may not have a minute to kind of put their head up and see what resources are out there, but that sort of proactive outreach, so GCs and legal departments within the organizations know what resources you have. I don't think you have to reinvent the wheel, but just let them know what you have so that they can then integrate that into their internal infrastructure, I think would be most helpful.
And from a bar leadership perspective, what I would say, and one of our greatest partners, and I know they're here, LexisNexis, for almost the last decade have assisted us with our election protection efforts. And so they have offered to us the opportunity to do the research through their platform to make sure that information is correct. And our lawyers who assist in election protection, the poll watching, the dissemination of information, we have that platform as a resource. And so I thank them for that kind of work. And so when you're talking about what can businesses do, or what from a bar perspective you can do with businesses as you're looking for your sponsorship opportunities in those discussions. Many of them have the resources or they have an opportunity there, and if you approach it correctly, I mean, like what Mark was saying, for 45 years they've been doing this work. I mean, if you have that conversation up front, there may be some things that they are already doing that they need amplified. They may need additional resources that you may have available to you. So it goes back to what you said, Terry, the collaboration and the partnership is key.
And I would say as an incentive to do everything you're talking about, Robin, is Terry and I were talking about this a little bit before the program. When you do things that support the legal community, that's one thing. But if you will partner with some of these businesses, and I think if you can provide them, to directly answer your question, with nonpartisan materials about voter registration, poll worker, and even candidates, I think that would be terrific. I know that goes over really well in our organization. I think the more the bars could do that and provide that, particularly to the smaller businesses, but really businesses of any size, that would be a huge asset. Now, what do you get for that? You not only get the legal community involved now, you get the general public involved, because now you've engaged exponentially a whole lot more people in the business community, that work for all these organizations. So I think there's real incentive for the bars to do that, to make even more of a footprint in the desired result.
And just to add to that, I think it also makes your members feel more engaged. They're getting value out of their bar membership and involvement. And we've seen time and again that younger lawyers in particular are really hungering for this kind of activity. So this is really a way that we can structure it, and it benefits all of us. I think there was a question here. Yes?
Question. Yeah, I have a question for you. My concern.
I think you need to put it closer. It's on, but you need to.
How's that? Is that better?
Yep.
Yeah, I think I have a concern. But I want to tell you it was a wonderful presentation, and I'm all for everything that you've said. But I think that after the Boudreaux decision in the Fifth Circuit might disagree with you on the practice of law, how this is related to the practice of law, and that would be the concern I would have as a leader of a mandatory bar association. How do we square that with the Fifth Circuit, and what do we do about that? Because going forward, I think we've got a real problem with that, and everything that you're talking about, particularly with the educational component of this, is not germane to the practice of law under the Fifth Circuit's standard.
Yeah, I certainly think that there will be some bar associations that will have to think through, just the way companies think through what their level of engagement will be. They will have to think through whether this is an activity that they can square with their mandates. But I would say certainly, if you've got election lawyers who are involved in election law, that's at least one part of what we're talking about, and that might be a way, because that's a direct connection to the practice of law, the election law angle. But how far you go, you would have to decide as a bar association. But for those of us who are in bars that are either not mandatory, certainly a lot of the voluntary bar associations, this is an area of activity, and in the ABA it's kind of a core area of activity. But you're right, I think each bar will have to decide for themselves what they can get involved in and how far they can go. Is there a question back there?
Well, I didn't see anybody with a question, so I'm going to throw a question out to you.
Okay.
In most states, of course, we have the Chamber of Commerce. We have business roundtables. We have the National Federation of Independent Business People. Should bar associations and those entities, including private companies like your own, meet on a regular basis, either annually or semi-annually, to talk about the importance of fostering our democracy and how together, through a collaboration, we can reach a greater segment of the general public? I think, personally, that is an avenue that may have not been explored too much. Do any of your companies engage in that now? And would you recommend that be pursued even further?
I would say sure. I mean, I think the more you can get folks who have an understanding of civics and the way in which our system should work together to talk about that, I think the better. I will say the Ohio Business Roundtable does that. And actually, I think that's one of the ways Mark and I connected originally was through the Ohio Business Roundtable that does that periodically. I wouldn't say annually or on a regular basis, but periodically brings not only the business community but the legal counsel for those entities within Ohio to talk about what's going on in the politic and the general process. So yeah, I think it's a great idea, and it's been a productive relationship for our group, I believe.
I would concur with Terry's point. My only caveat to that would be you want to preserve the nonpartisan nature of your civic action programs. And if you get too into that neck of the woods, the risk runs where you could damage some of the trust and credibility that you've built up. So that's my only caveat. Generally, I agree with what Terry said, but that would be my one cautionary note.
Well, it's a room full of clever lawyers. I think we could try to just come right to the edge but not fall over.
Yeah, there you go.
So I think we can have time for one last question. Yes, gentlemen.
Jay Meyerson, State Delegate, Virginia, former president of the Virginia State Bar. This is really addressed to the two national bar associations, but I'd be interested in the feedback from the business people as well. We're coming up on the 60th anniversary of the murder of the 3 civil rights workers in Mississippi, and shortly thereafter, just a couple weeks after, the passage of the Voting Rights Act. What, if anything, is being done by the national organizations or that you would consider for your businesses to honor or at least memorialize the murder of the 3 civil rights workers and the passage of the Civil Rights Act? Thank you.
So that's how you're going to end this, huh? Thank you for the question. But I think what's important is the raising of where we come as a country and the reflection of where we came from. So when you talk about the 60th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, we are currently living in a monumentous time in America where the issues of fair elections, the ability to access the ballot box across the United States are one of the most critically important issues to protecting democracy. We still don't have the passage of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. That still is at a standstill in Congress. And in my opinion, and I am speaking as president of the National Bar Association, when you have Shelby County v. Holder and the elimination of the protections that existed at the time, that is when we have seen some of the most harmful laws passed by state legislatures across this country. So from our end, as the National Bar Association, we have written letters. It's part of our legislative agenda to ensure that the passage of the John Lewis Act, Voting Rights Act, is actually passed through. Now, I know that I'm not trying to get on a soapbox here, but it's important. And I'm dating myself, and I don't care.
Oh, boy.
I know. She hates it when I do this. I was born in 1986.
I have shoes older than 1986.
I know.
You kidding
Love
me?
it. Live in it. It's okay. It is what it is.
I literally do have shoes.
I know.
That are older than 1986.
I know you do. But here's why that's important. This is why that's important. I'm the 3rd youngest president of the National Bar Association. I'm telling you, it is not typical that this happens. But this is why it's important. There are my friends and those that come after me who have never experienced the things that many of you have seen. We don't know what that looks like. We didn't grow up in that world. And so when you're talking about the passage of this law, nobody within my generation, this millennial quote-unquote generation, many of them don't understand the importance. They don't get why this actually makes sense. They don't understand where we have come from so that you understand where we're headed. And that's the only point that I'm making with this. When we talk about commemorating what happened to those individuals who were trying to liberate folks in the South, and I'm from Texas, born and raised, I got my cowboy boots up in the room. I'm telling you that there are many of us who don't know the history, and they can't appreciate it. And so if you want to talk about the business of democracy, as I'll call it, then you have to educate them in the civics. Yes, I do remember Schoolhouse Rock. It was a critical part of my growing up at being. But what exists today? What Schoolhouse Rock actually exists today to teach people about civics? Where do they learn it? And then the constant argument is, well, the Department of Education can't teach this, and you can't force somebody else to ensure that civics is engaged, and then you get state legislatures that remove it, and then some of them have gone so far as to remove black history as if it's not American history. I'm telling you the truth. This is not as an example, it's just what you see. And so if we don't take amongst ourselves, as the lawyers, as the adults, as the judges, as the folks in the room that can be the trusted source, you're going to continue to have an erosion of what the law is and what people, like you all have before me, grew up to see. The fights that you engaged in to create progression and ensure that America was free and operative for everyone. And so, to your point, the National Bar Association will continue to push forward on those issues to make sure that we remind history, or we remind America of our history, but only for a standpoint and perspective to say, if we don't do this, then this is what will occur. So we'll continue in that work. Thank you for the question, but we'll continue to engage in it.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, sorry. That's absolutely correct, and one of the things I want to do now is bring up, first I want to thank the panelists. As I said, there were, I hope, a lot of information that you can take back to your bars and ideas about how you can work with business to push forward on protecting, really, our democracy and supporting the rule of law. So thank you to them. Thank you very much. Yes, we can thank them. And now I want to call Bill Ide, who was a past president of the ABA. It's R. William Ide III, vice chair of the ABA Task Force for American Democracy. And I think that he will be able to enlighten you on some of the things that we're doing that may speak to the last question as well.
I feel a real obligation to communicate to you that this is a moment in history for lawyers that I've never seen before. And each of us are going to have a great challenge of how we respond to this moment. And I also feel an obligation to the many of you, and they're already working on this, whether it's the Cornerstones, whether it's World Justice Project, or whether it's the advisory board. It's interesting, the last commentary about young people. We've already had a session where we talked to some younger people about the crisis we're in, and I'll get to that in a minute. And we sort of apologized to the younger person, and the younger person said, you didn't need to apologize because you didn't know what you didn't know back then. But now you do know. And if you don't do something now, then you should apologize. So why is this the greatest moment in history, maybe for us as lawyers? Let's look what happened to COVID. There was no game plan. It came out of nowhere, and it caused great damage, and yet leadership overcame the surprise, and they acted. Well, we have the same thing, and the doctors, when you did polling of people, who do you trust about COVID? They said the doctor. So here we are in democracy, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute of why it is a crisis. But we have the same game plan. Didn't expect it. Voodoo law was always a problem abroad. We never thought we would see the autocracy versus democracy struggles come here. They're here. And it is very hard to adjust rapidly. But people are going to look to the lawyers. And if the lawyers in the community respond and explain with all the disinformation, misinformation, the complexity of globalization, That's the gold. So let me talk to you a little bit about what is the crisis, why do we have it. Benjamin Franklin came out, if you all probably remember in history, from the Constitutional Convention, say, we have a democracy if we can keep it. And for 250 years, we have kept it. We had the Revolution to create it. We had the Civil War. We had World War I. We had World War II. But as Abraham Lincoln commented back in his day, the greatest threat to democracy is not from without on the external side, but it's from within. Democracy requires a lot of work. It requires civics, it requires defenders, it requires nurturing. And yet, if you look at January 6th, if you look at the polarization, there are clear signals that we have not maintained it, that we have not nurtured it the way we should. And the data is even clearer. So let's talk about the data. A lack of civics education. 25% of Americans can only name one out of the 3 branches of government. 20% of Americans cannot name any of the branches of government. 51% of Americans are dissatisfied with democracy. 46% are open to considering autocracy. If we could get the slides now. So we have a lack of education, and I've listed some of them there. But then with the lack of education has come lack of trust. And the one that just jumps out is 1/3 of the Americans believe that the 2020 election today was stolen, despite 60 court rulings that there was no steal. Now, that is shocking if you think about the 3 branches of government. You think about an independent judiciary. And when all of a sudden loss of trust creates the judiciary, politicalization will start. So the framework for all of this has come really from the second Cold War we're in right now, which is Russia, Iran, China, through social media, has been seeking to discredit, have us lose confidence, create chaos, and attacking democracy in favor of autocracy. And it's a false choice. And yet, if we could go to the other slide. That's not the one. Can you come to the, there we go. So 18% of Americans are highly disposed to authoritarianism, but they really don't know what it is. And, you know, as you heard earlier, younger people have never lived through the Cold War. Younger people don't remember World War II like I do. Of course, there aren't that many people my age around, yeah. But and it says for 200 years, it was actually 250. And democracy and rule of law allows all citizens to vote, empowers democracy capitalism, allowing business to protect. And I was a general counsel of a company, and I can tell you when we worked abroad, that was critical to not have incompetent regulation, not to have on the right a strong person where you had to deal with the tribe. The government officials were selected by loyalty to the strong person, not by their ability to function. And so if over history, you will see constantly autocracy may arrive, there may be the strong person, but over time it fails because it cannot produce. And if you look at the comparison and studies of how democracy is done, and this is back to the business people, globally versus autocracy, it always outperforms. So where do lawyers fit in? So if I could have the next slide, please. We took an oath that we would support, when we became lawyers, the Constitution of the United States, Constitution of our federal government, and we would discharge our duties. And here's where, when I heard the question about the Fifth Circuit, we are losing our way. One of the shocking things when we started talking to law school about democracy is they don't teach democracy, they don't teach civics, they don't teach rule of law, except talking abroad, because we were complacent. I mean, I was part of that. We worked in the Forbes Soviet Bloc country on the Rule of Law Initiative. We never dreamed we would have this issue here. So we're talking to through our task force, we're talking to the deans of how do we teach lawyers, law students, when they go in the community, they are the most knowledgeable members in the community about civics, about democracy, about rule of law. And when I took this task on to be vice chairman of this, I'm glad you didn't quiz me. Exactly what's the difference between rule of law, what's the difference between democracy, and how does all that work? And if we gave a test to a law graduate today that someone seeking to enter this country, they would probably flunk when the test of civics. So we're talking to the deans, and 2 deans are on our task force, one from Stanford and one from Yale, and William Hubbard, who is at South Carolina dean. We're working with the deans because we need to get lawyers trained and equipped. We also need to talk about mandatory CLE, because if we're going to be leaders, and this gets back to the discussion I had earlier, if we're going to have a framework with which we can all do our endeavors and produce the best outcome, which is what democracy does, then we have to maintain it. We have to nurture it. So the law schools have to teach it. Mandatory CLE has to do it. And then the bar associations need to get involved. And that's where, right now, I'm calling on each of you and me that we can work together. So let's talk a minute about, if I could have the next slide. But I'm going to go back just for a second. Let me go back to the Fifth Circuit. That's a terrible decision. And we're going to work with the law schools. We got to work more at defining what is the practice of law, because the practice of law is maintaining the framework with which we all endeavor. It's not just a cheating and stealing. It's a much broader obligation. And that's what we're going to have to work on. So if I could have the next slide, please. So we need to work together, because all this is state level, local level. We'll do what we can nationally. We'll bring together the thought pieces, but it's in your community. That's where the difference is. They're going to look to the lawyers. They're going to look to the court. They're going to look to leadership. So here are the kinds of things that we can do together, and we would be glad to furnish materials. The one you just had on what business can do is fantastic, and we will help you. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce is working on civics, and in your community we should hook up with the chamber, hook up with businesses, hook up with the bar associations. We'll have models like that. You've already heard about poll workers, but we have to scale this up. We need this to happen everywhere. So that's civics, lower the temperature, et cetera. So those are the things that we would love to work with each bar association. We will be glad to give you toolkits, but the challenge is the complacency that we still have amongst ourselves, amongst our bar members. Well, surely democracy is not the highest priority. We got so many things to do. Well, it is. The 2024 election could be very determinative of where we will be as a country on whether democracy versus authoritarianism. That is the truth, my friends. And if I have any success today, it's trying to make that point. That's why this is such a critical moment in history, because we haven't seen that before in my day. And I go back to, I clerked in the Fifth Circuit, the old Fifth Circuit, and we went through the civil rights. And there, no one contested the overall system. They didn't like Earl Warren as the Chief Justice, and we did have the Ku Klux Klan putting some crosses in front of Judge Johnson and other Johnsons. But overall, it wasn't questioning the whole system. This is a question of the system, because if you eliminate an independent judiciary and you politicize like the Justice Department, Jeff, we almost had that happen before. If I have the next slide, please. So this is your President Mary Smith formed us. That's just telling you these wonderful leaders we have, and we've got a list of that. If I could have the next slide, please. We will have working papers almost done. So whether it's deep fakes, that's going to happen. You're going to have artificial intelligence all over the place. Whether it's safety of election workers, we're going to have model legislation that we would ask each of you in your own state to consider passing. And we will make this information available to you and your committees. We're having, we call it listening tours, hearings. The first one's in Georgia, the 13th of February. The purpose there is to go local, to, as you know, Georgia's quite the place for a discussion of elections. And we'll have our Secretary of State explaining how we do elections. We'll have election workers explaining that there really is no steal going on. It hasn't been. But then we're going to rally our citizens. We'll have the law schools there. We'll have the bar there. But we'll also have a lot of civic leaders. We're then going to go on to Michigan, we're going to Wisconsin, Arizona, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Nevada. These are the states where there's been a lot of questioning about the administration of elections, where trust is low. We're going to work on that. But we also have toolkits for each of you, whether it's in your community at the local level or the state level, which it would be wonderful if lawyers are seen standing up. We're all reading the headlines every day about democracy, but what are you going to do about it? You've got to start conversations at the local level and say, what's truth? We will also have rapid response teams. There's going to be a tremendous amount of misinformation, disinformation as we move towards the election. And we are going to have at the national level, and we would like to work at the local level, people to just do truth telling. If something comes out, we'll have a group ready to say, here are the true facts. The strategic communication is very much the same. It's working on what we can do to have democracy. And am I about out of time, Robin? That's okay. But we are, Carl Smallwood is the driver of all of this. We work with Carl, we work with the advisory board, and we very much want to hold hands with you and work together. This is a moment in history. If we fail, we fail. If we try, we did our best. If we do nothing, we really failed. Thank you very much.